In this episode, we are going to be reviewing the Italian film, The Decameron. This was directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. He also wrote the screenplay adapted from the novel, The Decameron, which it is also called, which was written by Giovanni Boccaccio. The film starred Franco, Citti, and Ninetto, Davoli. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film. I want to welcome to the show Anthony King, who has a terrific podcast called Cult Movies Podcast, which celebrates underseen films, lesser known gems, and unrecognized masterpieces maligned and panned by audiences and critics alike. It is based on Danny Perry's books, and I've been really enjoying it. So Anthony, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Robert, for having me. I really appreciate it. I love coming on other people's shows because it's, I always tell people it's much less work having to drive the show. Being a guest is so much more fun.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's more of a freeing experience because you don't have to be navigating the boat.
That's right.
So to speak. I was curious, just this is our first time meeting, and I was curious when your love of cinema began.
I think probably it was born on Friday nights when I was a kid. We would go to my grandma Joe's house, and there would always we'd get pizza, and we'd rent two movies from the video store down the street, and we would. It was always something sort of not a kid's movie, but more family friendly movie, and then something for the grown-ups. And so the kids would stay awake, for the first movie, and then sometimes we'd go off and play, or we'd go and sleep in the bed while the grown-ups watched the second movie. And so it was sort of then where it definitely wasn't cinema; it was movies. I just loved watching movies.
Right.
Then we got our first VCR in the late 80s, I think. And then just, started basically collecting VHS and watching whatever we could. But it wasn't until I was like maybe 32. So fairly recently, within the decade, that I really dove deep into movies and film and cinema, and like started studying things and like watching things I never would have previously, and foreign films and older black and white silent films, and just kind of fell in love with devouring that media. And basically I'm playing catch up now with everybody who has like been watching, Sam Deegan, for instance. Her grandma, showed her classic foreign cinema when she was a kid.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like I'm playing catch up now, and it's super fun because I get to discover all these great films that people had seen years and years ago. And so, a lot of times people say, oh, I wish I could experience watching that for the first time again. So it's been fun, this past decade, just kind of digging in and watching classic stuff, but also, trash, because we all love some trash every now and then too.
You mentioned foreign films because we're talking Italian films today. Are there any Italian films or Italian filmmakers that you like a lot?
You know what? I don't know what it is about Italian films. They're not my favorite. So like, for instance, take giallo films. I don't really love giallo films.
Right.
I personally find them kind of boring. And when I say that to people, they, oh my gosh, right, they're offended. And I'm sorry, it's just like, it's not my bag.
It's not mine either. The giallo, no. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what I do love is the Polizia Tecce movies, those Italian crime films from the late 60s and 70s and early 80s, where they were kind of responding to the corrupt government and corrupt police forces of that time. And so there are these ultra violent, exciting crime films that I just adore. And kind of Arrow has put out a couple really great box sets called Years of Lead with 4 or 5, maybe 6 films in each that are just, they're so fun to watch. And, it's great education because you can watch these films and then, they were a response to something that was really happening. And that's
Right.
another reason I love film, is that you watch a thing and you go back and like read about why this thing was made. And so
Yeah,
that
exactly.
time period in Italy is very interesting to me because it's, it's action packed and violent and scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are there any Italian films or filmmakers that you're still want to discover or have on a watch list, or is it not that specific?
Yeah, I guess it's not that specific, but I mean, the film we're talking about today, that filmmaker I'd never seen. I still haven't seen any other Pasolini films but this one. And so he's kind of one that I've been wanting to dive into, and I was sort of nervous. It seemed a little daunting because I just assumed that stuff was over my head. But after this film, as we'll get into it, it's definitely not going to be over my head. I feel like it's really entertaining, good stuff. But uh, the history, I think, involved in Italian cinema is what interests me more than even, the craft. Although I do love a down and dirty spaghetti western.
This film today, the Decameron, I also had never seen it before. I love Pasolini, Acatone, Mama Roma, Teorema. He's done the Gospel according to Saint Matthew, but I haven't seen all of his movies. He was a really controversial figure in Italy, and to this day, I'm sure you read he was actually murdered. And to this day, they don't know who did it. And this is probably him because his films were always very dark and controversial. This is controversial, but it's quite funny. It's got a lot of humor. So I was curious, how you felt about it, because there's so many different stories.
Yeah.
What do you think the film was really exploring?
I have this note here. It says morality / humanity / religion / art.
Yeah.
And I think it's this sort of, I was picturing as the film was wrapping up, watched it for the first time just a few hours ago. And as the film was wrapping up, I was picturing this sort of circle with each of these things kind of at a place in the circle, and one leading to the other, and how they're all sort of relative, and how you can't have one without the other. And I think that's where Pasolini comes in, especially with the art stuff, with the religion. I mean, with all of it, really. It was his job to sort of bring it all together to make a film, to make this story. But I think deep down, so like the Decameron was originally completed back in 1353 or something like that.
The book, yeah. Is it
Right.
yeah, it's from it was written by Giovanni Boccaccio, yeah, 1300s, yeah.
And I just think it's funny that it's all about storytelling. That's I think plain and simple, that's all it is. It's because the Decameron it's more than 9 stories. Like it's like Aesop's fables. It's a book full of just different stories and vignettes. And I think back to even the Bible, which personally I read just as sort of a piece of history and also just a book of stories. And I love storytelling. And I just love that as far back as the 1300s, and of course beforehand, people were just sitting around telling stories.
Right.
For multiple reasons. It just to eat up the time, to maybe teach a lesson. I mean, so many different reasons, but people love to tell stories, whether they're true or not. And I love how now modern storytellers, Pasolini, Tarantino, James Cameron, or authors take stories that they heard when they were kids and sort of recombobulated them to tell their own story. And that's what I think the Decameron is essentially. Pasolini came in and made it more thought-provoking. But essentially it's just about storytelling. And there is that one brief scene in the film of the old man, I think it was like for the second story about the horny nuns, where he's sitting there on the ground out in the town square, just like telling a story, entertaining the crowd. And that's all it's about. And I think when we think about film, going to the theater, watching a play or a musical, listening to a song, watching a TV show, reading a book, whatever, we just want to be entertained, and we want our minds to move. And I think that's all this is. It's plain and simple, just telling a story. And I love that's always been, since the beginning of time, people have told stories.
I that's really well said. And there's also that great storyteller when Franco, I always want to say Needy. Franco Citti, people will probably know him best from The Godfather. He's in a lot of Pasolini films. And he's pickpocketing money. And then you've got that one old woman who's first she's trying to tell a story from a book, but then because it's in Latin, she feels like, well, she throws it away and then does it in the Napolitano dialect. And the whole film, of course, is in the Napolitano dialect, and it's not the tradition, the standard, what the Northerners were speaking, just the standard Italian dialect, because every single region has a different one. And that was obviously an intentional move by Pasolini, because he was always for the working class. He was for the peasants. He was a open Marxist. He was openly homosexual. He was just straight up with his opinions, and that's largely why he stirred up a lot of controversy. And the whole film, he's using these non-actors, with the exception of a couple. Citti, of course, people would know, non-actors. And I'm always amazed, because to me, the Italian filmmakers are always the best at using local people to tell their story. And on the one hand, some of their performances are actually quite good. At sometimes it feels flat, and it's obviously dubbed, but that's okay for me. I'm okay with that, because he makes up for it with those faces. Like, you can't go to a casting office and find these faces, like there's no way in Rome or anywhere. They're the peasants. They're the people who are maybe have a grade 3 education. And I thought it was just incredible what he did with them. And like he was able to get an innocence that is hard to get from even a truly great actor, because it's all just in their face. I don't know how you felt about some of those various performers.
Yeah, it wasn't until I can't remember if it was the third or fourth story where the guy was hiding in the jug.
I was thinking him to the teeth and everything.
So okay, that's what I was gonna say. I think you could pick out actors versus non-actors by looking at their teeth. There's a lot of bad teeth in this movie.
A lot of bad teeth.
And zero judgment, of course.
Yeah, right.
But
yeah. No.
I think the non-actors, those locals, bring such an authenticity to these stories. And this is made in probably filmed in 1970, released in 71, but it's set in the 1300s, way back, right?
Yeah.
And my God, these people it looked and seemed like they were like transported from that time period to
I
make
know,
this
it's
movie.
amazing. Yeah.
And here's the one. So Pasolini is in this movie, right? He's the artist,
The
sort of
painter story. Yeah.
the painter who almost kind of brings everything together at the end there, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I'd never seen a Pasolini film, and I don't even remember seeing a picture of Pasolini himself. And so when movies playing, I'm on IMDb trying to like keep the actor straight, and I say, oh my gosh, he's going to act in this, and he comes on screen, and he is a frightening looking man. I thought it's like it's a cross between John Cassavetes and Henry Rollins, like someone who seems like he's very intense
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
can be very mean and scary. But you look at this movie and it is hysterical. This movie
So
is
funny.
so, I mean, it's rare anymore that I watch a film where I laugh out loud. But when I laugh out loud, I don't know, 6 dozen times within a movie, that's a pretty darn funny movie. And I did that with this one. I was not expecting that. Anyways,
Neither was I.
so you have this scary looking man who is very intense and has made some very intense movies, some very dark movies, but then he has this very funny movie, and he has some very funny moments in this film himself, when he's eating, kind of throwing the soup in his mouth. He's like, oh, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And he runs up the
He
stairs.
gets inspired all of a sudden.
It's very, very funny. And so I'm thinking, so here's this like working class, very real man, Pasolini himself, a very just, um, artistic, very obviously brilliant man who can probably be intense. But obviously he's an extremely nice person to be able to incorporate, these professional actors with the locals and get these performances out of these local non-actors they really did go toe to toe with the professional actors.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think that says a lot about Pasolini himself, and that he can relate to kind of those both sides. And it was such I guess comforting to think about that, because coming into this, because the man did a movie that has scared me. I haven't seen it, but has scared me away
Salo?
from Salo.
Yeah, I can't watch it. I can't. I still can't watch it.
And so I assumed, oh my God, this guy's filmography is probably all like that. Well, no, because the Decameron is hysterical. And it's
funny.
It's very, it's deep and everything, sure, but it's quite lighthearted.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at this man in a different light and seeing how he put this whole thing together, this sort of like it's an anthology. Rarely do we get a non-horror anthology, right? And so I think that's really cool in that aspect. But this man has such a human quality, and you can tell like he has a heart the size of a freaking boulder, to speak to the working class, to speak to the people who are kind of downtrodden, that the government sort of just, throws off to the side. And so it was, man, it was a really special moment watching this film, because all of my assumptions were just like, it was like God laughing at me saying, nah, please, you don't even know this man. This is who this man is. So it's really cool.
No, I'm glad you had that experience, because like I've like I said off the top, like I've know a number of his films, and they're all deeply serious. Can't remember a smidge of laughter in any of them. So when this film started, it starts with the first story of this thief who then gets conned by this woman, claiming to be this rich woman claiming to be his brother and claiming to be his brother. And then he's staying over at her place. And I thought, okay, so I'm watching. And then all of a sudden he goes to the washroom and falls into this pit of shit. And I was like, what is going on? I couldn't believe it. And, you know,
they were setting up the kind of trap for him, right? And they showed somebody, this disembodied hand, sawing through. But then I was like, what, is that a turd sitting right next to where he's like, what is this? Because they don't kind of explain what he's doing at that point.
Right.
And the really funny thing is, so I watched it this morning, and here I am eating my breakfast while I'm watching this. I'm like, oh no, what is going on here? Like, is shit involved in all of his movies? Because I know,
yeah,
you know,
don't eat and watch this, folks.
But yeah, that really caught me off guard. And again, I was coming into this thinking this is going to be, you know, sort of a pretty dramatic slog, you know, an Italian period drama. Like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Happy to be on the show, but all right, here we go. Let's do this. And it starts like this guy strutting, and he's like just overacting and playing it to the rafters. And immediately I was like, okay, now I'm settled in and I'm ready to see what happens, because this is obviously very funny. And it was.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great opening vignette that was.
That I love the I mean, I loved all of the vignettes. The opening was great, and that was the clear, obvious anti-capitalist message, because here's someone who's so rich and she cons this, you know, petty thief who has no other option but to steal, and so she feels she has to rob what he stole and throw him into a big, you know, tub of shit. I just thought, but then makes it so funny at the same time, because the irony is he escapes and then he winds up with these other guys who are going to go, and I guess that was like a cardinal or some religious figure, he had died, go into his coffin to steal the jewelry off of him. And when he lies to them to say that there's no ring, you know, and then they lock him in there, I just thought, oh my God, this guy is getting into some surreal nightmares. And but then, you know, as we saw, these other guys come with the same idea to rob this dead man in the coffin, and he bites one of their legs and runs off. and keeps the ring, and then now he's a rich man. I just thought, how do you have this serious message in such an absurd, surrealistic scene? It was so crazy, and they're all really crazy. I mean, every single one of them were like, oh my God. And I'm not surprised. Apparently there was like tons of lawsuits when this film came out. I mean, we're in Italy, you know, Italy is a, you know, Catholic country. And here's this guy who is exploring a film that is about sex, and it is about capitalism, and it is about morals and greed and taboos and religion, and how their religion often makes people to be hypocrites, as we saw in the film with so many of the characters. And he really pushed a lot of buttons, but it's amazing how funny he made it. Like, I mean, that's also goes down to Boccaccio's novel, obviously. So Boccaccio, I'm not familiar with his writings, but he was obviously way ahead of the times with commenting. And this is still so relevant because you particularly the ways in which people justify when they do something wrong, and they lie to themselves about it. And we saw that in a number of the stories. And the one that my favorite one was probably the second one. Yeah. With the guy who pretends to be deaf and mute and goes and stays in this convent with all these various pretty nuns. And it's interesting because the nuns, clearly they are oppressed, and they can't follow their sexual impulses. So they're gonna have sex with this deaf mute because he can't say anything. And then it was interesting when one of them said to the other one, well, we gave ourselves to God. And she's like, well, yeah, but we sin every day, like it's like, it's like, so in other words, we'll be forgiven. But I love how then he ends up sleeping with all of these nuns to the point where he's overworked. And when he speaks, and he's like, "Oh man, I can't do. You guys are tiring me out." And then they think he's like a miracle. Like, oh, he can speak. God has sent a miracle. And I'm like, did you not just hear what he said? But they know what he did. But we have to lie to ourselves. We have to justify our sins. And I mean, I'm not saying that in their view, of course, they did something wrong because they've given themselves to God and they're religious and they're nuns and there's rules. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with having sex with this guy, but within the confines of their world and the way that they see the world, it's a sin. But they just lie to themselves. And not only, I don't want to just say, oh, religious people do that all the time, but religious people do it, but people do that in general. We do something wrong and it's like, well, they did this, or we always get defensive or justify it or lie to ourselves. And I love that vignette. I just thought it wasn't just about religion, but it was about sort of the human condition in some ways. I don't know how you felt about it.
That's exactly right. I think that's sort of my my first note being that this movie has it's religion, morality, humanity, and art. And I think I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we have this thing called Rule 62, and Rule 62 says don't take yourself so seriously. And I think here we have Pasolini taking this brilliant, funny yet serious text from the 1300s and telling these stories in a way that can be relatable till the end of time. And yes, these are serious situations. These are serious, underlying stories, but Pasolini is not taking himself seriously throughout the entire film. He's adding a spin to it. And I think this is where the humanity comes into it. So we're in this convent. We have the, a dozen nuns who are, very pious. They're devout. They go around, their hands together and they're, parading around and whatever they do, chanting and singing their hymns and stuff. And then there's the Mother Superior who, is kind of overseeing the whole thing. But then when Mother Superior breaks at the end, and she gets him after he's been used too much. But she's like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. And then, takes him back and, gathers all the other girls together. And she's like, we're going to make sure that we can, make this work, that everybody gets laid here, including me. And I think that's Pasolini, like reminding us that sure, people, especially Italians, especially at this time, like you said, very Catholic, very conservative, people are human, and we have human impulses and we act on those impulses, and certain impulses aren't bad, i.e. sex. Having sex is not bad. And if nuns, like if that's their thing and they take that vow of celibacy, fine, whatever. But you know what? Nuns are still human beings. And probably somewhere in there's a sexual urge, buried deep down. But I do love how Pasolini, like you said, takes these very serious subjects, but then he doesn't take himself seriously. And makes this super funny movie. And I agree with you. I think the second vignette with the nuns, by far my favorite, because it's so funny, because the first one, they take him into this like little underground closet thing in the vineyard. She lays down and like pulls up her smock, and he's like, cool, and he lifts up his shirt and like like his boner's looking right into the
my
camera.
God, yeah. he was not shy with the full frontal nudity, Pasolini, from men especially, so which which made me laugh as well. The only one that has a more serious quality to it, even though it was kind of funny at the same time, was the woman who's with the family in Messina, and they're a very rich family, and she's having an affair with one of the men who work for her, the Sicilian men who work for her, for the family. And one of the brothers spots this affair happening while he's having sex, which was a nice touch. Yeah. So he's so angry because now she is no longer quote unquote pure, and this guy basically robbed her of her purity, and they're so mad. They're not even mad. Like one guy's like going insane, one of the brothers. Yeah. And so they devise this plan to kill him because of what he did. And again, it just goes, it's that hypocrisy where it's like, in this patriarchal society in which they lived, where it's okay for them to have freedom and do what they want, but it's not okay for her. And you see that she can't do anything about it. And she doesn't stand up to them. She doesn't get mad at them. Then there's this, dream sequence where this young man who was killed tells her what happened. She finds the body, and then it was so morbid yet touching at the same time that she cuts his head off in order to preserve him and put him in a plant. And that's all that she has left of him, which was so sad and devastating. And I felt so bad for her because these brothers were just brutal. And that's all was also the clearly anti-capitalist message of the poor Southern worker who's being exploited by this capitalist family, rich family, and because he's enjoying himself and one of the siblings is enjoying herself, they've got to stop that. Yeah. And that was very clear. I don't know how you felt about that vignette.
Yeah, I agree. It is the kind of one standalone serious one. But there is, like you said, absurdity mixed in with her cutting off the head, and then, with her maid, planting it with the basil, which left me wondering what head basil tastes like. But yeah, kind of that's also the one story with my favorite shot in it. The brothers invite the boyfriend out, for a day off, and they're running around the vineyard, and there are these tracking shots that are the cameras on one side of this, sort of man-made put together fence, and then the boys are running through the vineyard, and it's a close shot, and so it looks like the camera's moving 80 miles an hour, but the camera's following the boys, and they're kind of running around this square of a vineyard, and it is so beautiful. I mean, for some reason, I was just like, my breath was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is. And I think that also, I also wanted to mention like the setting where Pasolini filmed this, the different gardens and vineyards and like these sort of old ruins, that convent overlooking the sea. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, just like the most beautiful locations. And it was, not my least favorite, but it was a little, I don't want to say jarring, but maybe a bit of a downer. I was like, because, I'm high on laughter this whole time. And then we get this serious story, very good story. The performances in this one were great. The brothers like really scared me. They seemed like,
they were really good.
Real loose cannons there. Mm-hmm. And that poor young woman was just so touching at the end, that final shot with her kind of, holding the head basil. Thinking about it is silly, but I mean, it was still a very touching, beautiful shot.
Talking about it, it sounds, I mean, it is absurd, but talking about it sounds so funny. But then when you see it, it's like, oh God, it's so devastating.
It is. It really is. Yeah, true.
But yeah, that was certainly one of my favorites as well. You had mentioned some of the locations, and what's interesting about this film is that before this, he largely had shot in the neorealist tradition. Not so much with Teorema, which was right before this. Teorema, I suppose, and he started to become more stylized. And this has a happy medium between the two, because he's still using like local actors, has a certain documentary feel, but then it has this. He's clearly, there's actually on the Criterion channel, there are I don't know if you
That's
saw it,
where I
but there
watched
was,
it. Yeah.
yeah, there was a really great video essay about the direction in this and how he was literally using certain Italian paintings with some of the shots.
Oh, cool.
And what one of them was when he as the painter wakes up and he suddenly sees the Virgin Mary, and one side is like hell and one side is heaven. So he was using all of these paintings and you know, more stylized ways of telling the story. And I think he was doing that because I initially did quite, I mean, I liked seeing him as the painter in it. I didn't even realize he was in it, but initially I thought, well, what was the point of the, you know, the guy painting? And I got the message that, okay, yeah, he's seeing all of these stories in a way, and now he's expressing it through painting. But then I was like, oh, well, actually it makes sense in the sense of seeing all of these stylized shots that really look like paintings and were based on paintings, and then having the artist basically interpret life and put it up on the ceiling, and celebrating you know, life and art towards the end. And one thing I didn't notice, I have to give credit to the video essay, was that at the end there's two big paintings they do, and the third one is blank on the right side of the wall.
Yeah.
And basically sort of like an invitation to like, let's continue to
Yes.
to create and tell stories, so to speak. So once I kind of became more informed as to why he did it, I sort of sometimes feel disappointed in myself when someone has to tell me why something was great. But there's just the nature of the beast sometimes. But then I was like, oh wow, that actually makes a lot of sense and actually really enriched it.
And it's all about that storytelling and talking about just people, humanity. And I think, not to get too existential or deep, that is, um, living in the present, living in the now, I think is important. And here we have Pasolini as the filmmaker and Pasolini as the artist in the movie, telling stories with his art concurrently as they're playing out in front of us on the screen, and like maybe out in the town surrounding him. And I think it's him saying, well, this blank piece is for tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
And once we start living tomorrow, I can start creating that, but I'm not going to worry about that. And I think that's important for us to, you know, there's so much of this movie is about sex or having affairs or like acting on, you know, your heart driven impulses, which I think is how we live life. And we can't act on those heart driven impulses in a future manner. Like that stuff happens like instantaneously. Sometimes horrible shit happens when we make those decisions, but sometimes great stuff happens. Stuff happens is the point. And I thought that was, you know, again, made me think and feel differently about this man I knew nothing about. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy he loves people. He loves telling their stories, and he doesn't know what their stories are for tomorrow. He's going to wait until they happen, and then he can tell them. I don't know. Again, it was a really special kind of moment of clarity at the end when they pull that scaffolding back, and with him standing there, he doesn't move, and they pull it through him, and they turn it to the side, and then we see what has happened, you know, in the past, what's happened, you know, today, and what is going to happen tomorrow. We don't know.
Yeah. No, I liked it a lot. In hindsight, I thought that was a really beautiful way to explore the story and explore life and art, and like you said, that we have these impulses, and we shouldn't let these taboos and these hangups and our religions and greed and all these other kind of things hold us back. The other one of the other vignettes I liked a lot was the very last one with the two men, and one of them is having sex with all these various women, and the other guy won't because he feels like he's going to go to hell if he does. And so and so they make this pact because they're talking about heaven and hell, and they make this pact that whoever dies first will come back and say what it's like. So of course the guy who's been sleeping around, he suddenly dies, and the other guy is like, oh, I know why he died, because he's been sinning. He's been having sex with these various women. And so he comes back and he's no, it's fine, it's not a sin. And then immediately the other guy goes and runs to this woman he knows, takes her clothes off. He's like, hey, it's okay, it's not a sin. And what I like so much about that one was just how often people like fall into this group thinking and like social popular opinions, and not having any like feelings or opinions on your own. It's just like, this is what you know, this is what you do, and do not step outside of it. And it's not even, it's in this case it is religion, but people have all kinds of different ways of thinking that is not their way of thinking necessarily, but it was basically either their families or they were born into it and they just haven't questioned it. And so I thought that was, again, this case happens to be religion, because this religion that they all follow, Catholicism, has these sets of rules, which in this case, sex being one of the sins outside of marriage, is something that you do not follow, or else you're going to go to hell. So it's just so funny that as soon as he feels it's okay for him, he's not going to go to hell, he follows that impulse, faster than a speeding bullet. I just thought that was so great. And I being brought up Catholic myself, I know that way of thinking, and I can recall, I won't say who it is, but I can recall having a discussion about homosexuality with someone, and in terms of and we were talking about religion, and this person said, well, the Pope said it's okay now, so it's like now.
Right.
And I just thought, it's like, they have to always be told. It's not that they can think for themselves, they have to be told. So I don't know how you felt about that vignette.
Here's I thought that was so funny, because it wasn't until that point that I realized Pasolini has told these stories, and he has led us down this path where we as the viewer are expecting one ending, like it's a tale of morality, basically, an absurd tale of morality, as when you mix in religion, a lot of that becomes absurd anyways. But and so we expect one thing to happen, and then he's like, no, we're going to go this direction. And so like that ending where, it's the two guys, it's right before the one guy dies, and they're laying, he just gets done getting laid, and he comes and he kicks his shoes off, lays on his bed, and he looks over at his friend, his friend's holding the rosary, right? And kind of says, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, and so they do a funeral processional, and the guy comes back, and we're like, of course he died. Like, that's where the story was headed. But then he says, oh, no, you can have sex. And immediately, like you said, the dude jumps up and runs next door and like rips this girl's blankets off and like jumps on top of her. The other one that I thought was that really kind of exploited that part of Pasolini's storytelling was the two young people, sort of almost a Romeo and Juliet type of story, where the kid's like, sleep out on the terrace above your garden tonight, and I'll sneak up and we can have sex.
Yeah.
And so they do, he sneaks up, they have sex, and like they have apparently lots of sex that night, and she can't get enough. He's worn out. These poor guys are having so much sex, they eventually can't have sex, it seems like, in every single one of these stories. But So he's laying there like no covers and his penis is hanging out like flaccid. And she sits up and looks at it and she's like, I just want to hold on to it. And so she
Yeah.
cups her hands around it. And it's, at once, sweet and tender. It's a very touching moment, but also it's like, oh my God, this girl's so freaking horny. What the hell? And so the dad wakes up and he comes in and sees, and he's astonished, and he runs and gets mom, and mom comes, and we're like, uh-oh, these two kids, they're over. They've had it. Like, this kid, they're going to kill him, because that seemed like that was the punishment at the time. And the dad's like, no, this is great. He has lots of money. Let's get married right now. And it's like what the kids wanted. They wanted to be together, and it happened. Like, it's a happy ending for them. And so it seemed like that's what happened. That first story with the thief, he's been swindling people. He got conned himself, but then he's going to like rob the jewels from the robbers, but also this dead guy. And we're like, oh, he's going to be trapped and he's going to die in this tomb forever. No, he gets away with it. And that's like all of these stories. That's how it happens. And I thought, gosh, that is such an interesting way to tell these stories, because you think, of the time period, and with this sort of conservative Catholicism mixed in, all the sinners are going to be punished, where it's like, no. Pasolini says, no, sinners are normal people and they don't have to be punished.
Well, that's the great irony. Yeah, that's the great irony. He was exploring, and you really saw that in those two stories, those that you mentioned. And what I love so much about that one was that it's that anti-capitalist message, because these people, he's criticizing religion a lot in the film, but that was actually one vignette where he wasn't necessarily defending religion either, but he was sort of showing how these people had these religious beliefs and these values. I don't think Pasolini necessarily agreed with how they looked at sex, or right. Our daughter can't have sex until she's married, like those very, very old fashioned ways of. I don't think he's saying that's how things should be, but I think what he's showing is how money corrupts people, So clearly, once they were these people who are very innocent, very pure, very humble, and all of a sudden they have now been, as Pasolini would put it, as they're now have been embraced culture, and now it's over for them, so and they corrupt themselves, right? They throw away what they believe in, because now we're going to get money, and that is so relevant with there are many opportunists out there, many people who will put money above all else. And again, he does it in a way which was so funny and unexpected. Like, I thought, like what you thought, like I thought at the end of that vignette, like the parents were just gonna freak, and then they're celebrating because he has money. It's like, just demand that they get married, you don't know whether the young guy would have married her later or not, but he feels that he should, because it's going to ruin him that if this gets out, right. Because of the ways in which people look at life and these kind of sexual relationships outside of marriage. So that was just another astonishing one.
Yeah.
Oh God, what a film! I mean, there are a few other ones. We don't have to go through every single one, because they all really explore all of the various themes that we mentioned. But was there anything else about the film you wanted to mention?
He can add in these very real, very sweet moments, or just very real moments that really got at my heart in this otherwise like kind of bonkers period comedy. But I was very moved by it. And so it alleviated the fear that I had of getting into Pasolini films. And I'm really excited to check out, Salo is going to be still pretty far down the list, but I'm excited. Like the Canterbury Tales, I think will probably be the next one I'll check out.
Yeah. Well, this is part of a trilogy, 3 parts. The other one is the Canterbury Tales, and then the other one is Arabian Nights. I actually haven't seen those either. I'm planning to check them out as well. But yeah, no, I mean, he's a wonderful filmmaker. So I'm glad that you're interested in checking out more of his films. And like I said, Akatone, Mama Roma, the Gospel according to St. Matthew, Teorema, I'm not crazy about. It's definitely worth exploring and checking out. I haven't seen all his films, but he's a study within himself, and he was really even though he was using neorealism and different things, he was a poet and a writer initially, and he was hired by Fellini to do dialogue and contribute to various scripts, because Fellini was doing movies like Nights of Cabiria about a prostitute, and Pasolini knew these people who lived like on the fringes of life, right? And he knew how to bring such an authenticity to it. But his films are like no one else. I mean, I'm just like it's almost as if he hadn't even seen another movie himself. It's just like he was like Bertolucci worked for him and said it was like he approached it in such a naive way intentionally, and it was like watching someone write the language. Like it's quite remarkable in a lot of ways. So I don't think there will be anyone like him again, but he left behind some incredible films. So I hope you enjoy more of his stuff, and hopefully you can come back again and we can discuss another one or discuss anything else.
Heck yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Where's the best place for people to find your podcast or follow you online?
You can find Cult Movies Podcast on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Cult Movies Pod, and it's wherever you find your podcasts. And then I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at AK Donnelly, AKDONELLY, and just watching movies. Right now I write for a site called fthismovie.com, and so I'm in the thick of a research project about 80s cop movies, which is completely different. So this was really nice. I'm in a deep dive on 8 Million Ways to Die right now, and so this was like a nice come out of the grit of cocaine and like neon of 8 Million Ways to Die.
It's a different kind of grit, but yes,
that's right. So I appreciated being able to watch this and then be able to talk about it.
Great. Well, I'll leave the links in the description box below for where you can follow Anthony online and check out his wonderful podcast. And this has been a real treat. So Anthony, thanks so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed it, and let's do it again sometime.
You got it. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this review. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube podcast and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I've ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. Patreon is exclusive content created by me that I put out month in and month out. And it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month as well, which as a member, you will have access to vote on. So if you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, head over to the link for full details. And lastly, if you are currently watching this on YouTube and this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I am live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.